Hey, Stellan Cousins. You already know what time it is. Animated horror stories. And animated horror stories. Doom, doom, doom. Doom, 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 doom. Boom, boom, boom. Y'all see where we at, y'all? Y'all see where we at? DNA Dark Knight Animations. Well, when he say Dark Knight, he means it's gonna be a dark night. So what? We're gonna jump into it. I say we're gonna jump into it because I'm gonna try to eat my snacks. Got a couple snacks this time around. I'm gonna try to eat them before he says something that makes me sick. Cause what his stories they'll make your stomach hurt. You know, if you know, you know. But what? Let's get on into it, y'all. Three true stalker horror stories animated. You see the guy in the back, he looking crazy. You can't see behind him, but that's the girl on her boot thing. They kissing, and he just look wild. So let's get on into it, y'all. Please go grab a um Please go grab a blunt. Please go grab a bottle of water. Please go grab a bag of chips, snacks, something. And please go grab a blanket so you can be snug. As I always say, feel free to go over to their channel so you can watch their stuff on your lonesome if you want to. We're new to DNA. We new to being over DNA House, so they got a lot of stuff for you to watch if you feel like it. So go over there, subscribe, and support. You see her blue thing being stalked. Mm, mm, mm. Try to hurry up and eat
There
my
was a
snack.
boy in my school. His name was Steven. He was very quiet, always lost in himself.
Uh-huh.
No one could tell what he was doing or thinking. There was another guy who was Steven's best friend, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
They only hung out with each other, always doing God knows what. One day, when we were in the cafeteria, a guy whose name was Dan, a year senior than us, asked Steven to give him all his money in a very harsh tone, or else he
Bully.
would beat Steven. He was about to give him all his money when I stepped in. You know what you're doing is called bullying, right?
Good
And do you
shit.
want me to complain about this? Everyone started looking at him, and he left while glaring at me.
You
I
bully.
told
Okay.
Steven to not let others walk all over you, and left. The
Aw.
next day, I found a chocolate at my desk along with a note which said, "Thank you for helping me." I looked towards Steven and smiled. There was a game zone around the area where I used to hang out with
That
my
girl was just trying to
friends.
be
We
helpful.
would just go there and spend hours playing games. The owner of the cafe practically had to throw us out every time, but he was a nice person. There was a guy who used to come at the cafe to play games every day. He was tall, lean, well-maintained body, dark blonde hair, green eyes, and always wore a hoodie. I had a crush on him.
Mm.
One day I went ahead and asked for his name and number. He told me his name was Stuart and he lived nearby. We started talking and hanging out together. I was secretly chatting in the classroom with Stuart when Steven's friend Matt came over and handed me a letter along with a rose. I
Mm.
looked at him with confusion. "It's from Steven," he said while giggling, and left. I opened the letter and there was, "I like you. Will you go out with me?" written on that. It made me angry, but I calmed down. I thought to myself that it was not his fault for liking me. I
Aw.
should let him down gently. So I took the note and went over to his desk. I told him that I cannot return his feelings because I like someone else and I can stay his friend if he wants.
That's a nice
He
way to
did
put
not
it.
say anything, just took the note from my hand. A week
Aw.
later after that incident, I noticed someone following me. I
Mm-hmm.
looked, it was a guy wearing a hoodie and his face was covered with a mask. I stopped and called him, "Who are you? Why are you following
That's his
me?"
friend.
But he did not reply. Instead, he threw a small rock at me and ran away. The brushed my hand a bit and did not hit hard. I
Mm-mm.
thought it's Steven because I rejected him. So the next day, I confronted him in front of everyone and asked him about following me. He denied following me, but I still warned him, saying, "It's good if it's not you, but if it is you, I will not let it go." And I stomped out.
Mm.
The next day, when I was in the gaming cafe hanging out with my friends, I found a note in my purse. There was a badly drawn picture of a girl on it, and there was a cross on her neck, and the word "bitch" was written on it. It made me
Mm-mm.
angry to my core. No one except my friends knew about this hidden cafe, so I was sure Steven was stalking me. I told my friends about everything, and they said they will support me if I take action against him. I was happy that I had such good friends. I started to play
Crazy when it's not
games.
even him.
That was when Stuart came and asked me out. I was already so much distressed from the Steven situation and needed a distraction, so I accepted it. We played and talked for hours, and then the owner asked us to leave because there were other customers waiting for their turns as well. We agreed and left. My home was also on walking distance. It took almost 20 minutes from foot to reach my home. After that, when I was going home from the cafe, suddenly someone came from the behind and hit me on the head using a baseball. I stumbled and almost fell from the sharp pain. That was when another hit came, and I fell unconscious. Before passing out, I saw it was the same guy in a hoodie who followed me the other day, and when I woke up, I was in the hospital. There were bandages wrapped around my head. Apparently, after the man hit me, I fell, and my head hit the ground and it started bleeding. When he saw me bleeding, he panicked and ran.
Boy.
There were people around who came rushing towards me and took me to the hospital. The doctors told me that it's not that serious and I would be fine after resting for a week or two. My friends informed me the school authorities about me suspecting Steven being the stalker, and Steven was called for questioning. But surprisingly, he kept denying till the end that he ever stalked me. They threatened him to tell the truth or he will get expelled. That's when Steven's best friend Matt came forward and confessed about stalking me. He told me that he thought of Steven as more than his brother, and when I rejected Steven, he was heartbroken, which he could not endure watching. So he followed me to check why I rejected him. He then saw me hanging out with Stuart and some other friends, and he got so angry that he wanted to hurt me for hurting Steven. Steven came to visit me at hospital and apologized instead of Matt. He also told me that Matt has been expelled and promised me to make sure that this never happens again. I was discharged after some days and I went home. My parents were very worried, so they called the school asking them for 2 months extended leave from the initial one. My dad asked me if I wanted to transfer schools, but I said, "No, Dad, I'm stronger than that."
You just want to stay over there.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Of course we have.
Any of you given that Bumble app a go? I know it seems massively counterintuitive to download an app which requires the girl to make the first move when they're notoriously not the ones to make the first move. But I can assure you, it's definitely worth it.
I seen a thing, and it was like, girls make the first move when they like you, or when they find you attractive. They'll make the first move.
Notoriously not the ones to make the first move. But I can assure you, it's definitely worth it. But at the same time, I think the single worst thing that happened to me in 2020 took place just as a result of a Bumble date. So, it all started when I matched with a Welsh girl named Lima. After a day or two of talking, we agreed to meet at a little cafe for a few coffees. We hit it off talking about this and that, and before you know it, we're chatting like we'd known each other for years. 1 hour turned to 2, 2 to 3, and still neither of us was ready to call time on the date. Neither of us drank alcohol that evening, her for religious reasons, me because I'm something of a fitness freak. But while she was drinking mocktails, I was on the coffee and I was on it big time. There came a point where I needed a wee so badly that I was practically doing the entire river dance routine waiting for the one-person toilet to become available. This happens every half an hour without fail almost all night. I have to interrupt her, apologize, and leg it off to the little bathroom to relieve myself. I felt like an absolute idiot having to nip off to the lab so often, but every time I emerged, she'd look up and smile, waving away my apologies with some light mockery of how I have the bladder of a 4-year-old. But one time, I emerged from the toilets to see that she's no longer sitting alone, and that someone is sitting in my seat. At first, I thought she just bumped into a guy she knew. She certainly looked quite comfortable talking to him, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. I walked up behind him, playfully put my hands on his shoulders and say, "I think you might be in my seat there, mate." It wasn't confrontational or aggressive, just pure banter. I expected the guy to jump up, maybe warmly apologize, maybe give a little introduction, something like that. But he didn't. He looked back at me with this look on his face that said, "Get your effing hands off of me." And as he's staring up at me, Lima shoots me this look as if to say, "Help." Only then am I like, "Wait, do you two know each other?" Turns out this bloke had been sitting alone enjoying some food and wine and had been making eyes at Lima every so often. Then, when I'd gone off for a wee, he'd taken his opportunity, sat in my seat, and began to, as Lima put it, flirt so outrageously forward that I thought I was going to puke up my nojito. Now, I actually had to ask this guy to leave us alone before he got up and finally gave me my chair back, not before he tried to stare me out. I had a few inches on him, that's in height, you oversized children, and I could tell he didn't put half the gym time in that I did, so it's not like I was in the least bit intimidated. It just seemed like he was trying really, really hard to be some comic book idea of what women want, and it was honestly a little bit pathetic. He looked completely and utterly harmless, like a chocolate pistol. He looks like he'd melt at the first sign of trouble. But as I found out later that night, looks can be dangerously deceiving.
What? I was going to say that.
So, after the little confrontation at the table, Lima and I laugh it off, then carry on with our night. Now, Lima can see over my shoulder and therefore also see the creepy guy, but all I can see in front of me is her and one of the cafe's walls, so I have to rely on her to let me know if the guy is still there. I honestly expected him to just leave after such a confrontation. Everyone in the cafe was watching. It was pretty mortifying, but he didn't. He stayed put and continued to make eyes at Lima, which, to her credit, she just ignored. But then when it came to me walking her home, he gets up and pays his bill too. Then yup, you guessed it. I look over my shoulder, and as we're passing through Chinatown, and guess who I see? Tiny Mr. Stareout, still keeping up the intimidation game by staring out from under his brow, obviously too drunk to realize he looked far more comical than scary. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't exactly scared at that point, but we were being followed. It made for something of a tense situation, but nothing I thought I couldn't handle. As we approached her apartment block, I asked Lima if she was comfortable going inside while the guy could see where she lived. She admitted to being uncomfortable about it, but the block had like 50 to 60 flats in it, and unless he got in the door behind her, there was little chance of him working out which unit she lived in. But as it turned out, Lena was way more concerned about me and actually invited me inside for a nightcap. I didn't assume that I was getting lucky, but I wasn't about to turn her down. So I went inside for a cup of this weird ginger tea, in the comfort that our little stalker friend would soon get bored and wander off. I was in her flat for no less than an hour, and by that time, each of us was confident that our new friend had departed. We even checked out of her bathroom window, which looked down into the street, and he was nowhere to be seen. So I thanked her for a good night. We had a little smooch, and I started my walk home with that lighter-than-air feeling you get after a successful date. It's around that time that I start thinking something along the lines of, God, imagine if that loser was somehow still following me, which prompts me to look over my shoulder. Lo and behold, there's a single figure following me, maybe 50 or 60 meters behind, with a remarkably similar silhouette to the lad who tried following us. I have to admit to being in a state of disbelief for a moment as I stopped and studied the figure as they approached. Then, after passing under a streetlight, I got a clear look at the person. It was him. "You gotta be screwing with me, mate," I said out loud, and immediately they stopped. I knew it was him, so him playing at being a statue didn't make a blind bit of difference. I just told him to keep his distance and there'd be no problems, then just carried on with the 20-minute walk back to my place. Every so often I'm checking over my shoulder and this lad is still behind me. Granted, he's some way away, but he's definitely following me, and the closer we get to my apartment, the more it becomes obvious that he's making a considerable effort to close the distance. Now, unlike Lima, the apartment I lived in was just one of two in this big old Edwardian. I have the top floors while the other tenant had the ground floor and the basement, complete with his entrance. So, if this lad sees what door I go into, he's got my flat. He doesn't have to guess which one of the 60 I'm in. He knows where I live. Obviously, I'm not in the least bit comfortable with that, so I decide on a little show of force to deter my new follower. I turn around and just march right at him. Then, when I'm within about spitting distance, I gave him what for about being a creep and a loser, promising I'll kick his head in if he carries on following me. It seemed to have the desired effect as he started walking off in the complete opposite direction. It was really strange, but I carry on walking, checking over my shoulder one more time, and he's gone. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. About a minute or two goes by and I reach the entrance to a fairly small park. My flat is literally just on the other side of it, so I'm in this blissful ignorance of thinking that not only had I scared the creepy guy off, but that I was so close to home that nothing could possibly hurt me now. I mean, I was on home base, right in my big old backyard. Besides, I'd had a great night. I had drinks with this gorgeous anesthesiologist, definitely securing myself a second date in the process, and I had myself a little tough guy moment with that absolute bam. Everything flashed bright for a second, and I felt my knees just buckling under me, almost as if though my brain had switched off power to them. I honestly don't know if I was knocked out for a second or two, but I do know that the next thing I can feel is this sharp, hot pain in the back left side of my head. I knew that I'd been hit by something, I just didn't know what or by who. I was so dazed that it didn't even occur to me that it could have been him. I honestly thought I was just being mugged or something, in which case it wouldn't have been my first rodeo. I'd been mugged at knife point in London back when I was a student, and I needed to just keep my mouth shut, hand over the valuables, and get away with nothing but damaged pride and a lump on my head. So, the only thing I do before trying to find my feet is to toss out my wallet and phone onto the concrete and just be like, just take it and F off. I heard someone wheeze a laugh, probably at how pathetic I looked. But when they spoke, I knew exactly who it was.
You get up and whoop his ass?
I thought you were going to kick my head in. Now look at you. Whack. It kicked me so hard in the side of the head that I thought my orbital socket might be broken. And in between worrying that I'd end up losing my eye if they kicked me again, it dawned on me the little tow rag who'd been following me had somehow found a way to cut me off and ambush me. And it became quite obvious that I was in much, much more trouble than I'd first anticipated. The phone and wallet weren't going to cut it. I needed to get on my feet, and fast. It didn't matter that I was taller and stronger, maybe even faster than this guy. He had the upper hand, and let me tell you, it was not a nice feeling. The force of the kick set me off balance, but I tried to use the momentum to find my feet. If I was drunk, I'd have been...
Do y'all hear the rain that's outside in that area? Cool. I'm asleep. Good tonight. Okay.
And utterly screwed. But since I was sober, I did actually manage to get both feet on the ground before trying to bring myself upright. But nope. Another kick hits me right in the corner of the mouth, and I was sent flying backwards again. This time, not only is my mouth filling up with blood, but I can feel the teeth on the left-hand side of my mouth grinding together where the kick had chipped a few of them. It sent my skin crawling as I spat the blood out. I put my hand out and felt something cold and metallic, a fence on which I was once again trying to pull myself up. But again, right as I was about to find my feet, the guy attacked. Only this time, he didn't strike me. He wrapped one arm around my neck and held something cold and sharp over my right eye.
Oh.
I'm not sure if it was a knife or a piece of glass or whatever, but I think that was the single most terrifying moment of my life, thinking, well, I'm going to be blind now, and hoping I'll be able to buck him off before he goes for my throat or something. Only he didn't cut me. Instead, he hissed something right into my ear. Let's just say brevity wasn't his strong suit, and I'd rather not type out the actual exchange, but it was as gloating, vicious, and vile as you can imagine, with plenty of references to the date I'd been on that evening. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just waited for whatever was going to happen. But thank God he must have seen sense or something. He made some comment about me only being alive the next day because he'd let me live. After that, he gave me one more good punch to the side of the face. Then all I heard was the sound of trainers hitting concrete as he legged it. I spent the next few minutes spitting out blood as I tried to find my phone. I think he'd either stamped on it or I'd maybe tossed it with a little too much force because the screen was smashed into bits. But again, a little bit of divine intervention meant it worked just enough for me to hammer out a 999 call, after which I dragged myself to the park's gates and sat there waiting for the ambulance to turn up. Aside from a bit of concussion, a lot of swelling, and some chipped teeth, I was pretty much all right. There was no skull fracture, no broken orbital socket, nothing like that, although I'd been lucky to say the least. The doctor said the first wound on the back of my head looked like it had come from a brick or a large rock, and if he'd hit me any harder with it in that particular spot, there's a good chance he'd have just killed me with his first strike. And that was the really scary bit, thinking that all the kicks and punches and threats that came after were like a weird blessing. I was still alive, when in some timelines, I would be checking in for the big sleep. I was angry about it for a long, long time, and I'd be a liar if I said I didn't let that attack change my behavior for the worse for a while. Seeing the guy getting 6 years for assault and grievous bodily harm really helped things, but still, that wasn't enough for me on some level, and it took me a while to acquiesce. Me and Lima carried on dating for a few months, which was lovely, but she had to move away for work, so obviously we had to call time on it. And the 4 trips to the dentist were terrible, as they basically had to file and cap my teeth one at a time, and that was definitely the worst part. How 5 minutes turned into an ordeal that lasted months of court dates and dental appointments. That's my one big takeaway from the whole thing, really. How one little misunderstanding can have terrifyingly far-reaching consequences.
Boy, there was no misunderstanding. He whooped
I've
your
been helping
ass.
deliver
He
newspapers
wanted
since
to.
my dad started as a carrier when I was 6. Eventually, my dad was given his own distribution center, so when I turned 16 and got my license, I started doing them on my own. Most of the people in the depot have been there for years. They've watched me grow up, and I consider many of them an extended part of my family. We spent every holiday together. The newspaper never had a day off. Countless birthdays. But there was one guy who always gave me the major creeps. I was about 14 when he started, I think. I used to hang out in the back office with some of my other friends as the years went on, and he always hung out back there because he was also friends with these people. At least that's what I thought. One of them recently told me they only tolerated him. I never spoke to him because something just felt really off about the guy, but nothing happened until last year.
Gotta be careful.
I moved home following my graduation from college. I was already having a hard time readjusting because I no longer had any friends in the area and I was missing my college town. Creepy guy that I'll just call B started hanging around me a lot. He had a weird man crush on my dad too, always buying him extra gifts for birthdays and holidays, sucking up majorly. I did my usual nice greeting, keep to myself stuff. But then he started buying me gifts for no reason. My mom told me to just keep them because it was all stuff I liked, Marvel and cat-themed things. That was probably my first mistake. He started acting like we were BFFs and coming out to find me while I was sitting in my car and talking about how I deserve so much more than being trapped here at the depot, and that he will do whatever it takes to get me out of here because he really cared about me and I deserve so much more.
Boy, this is a
I never really acknowledged it because I thought it was really weird, and I thought if I just kind of nodded quickly he'd go away. This went on for weeks. Then he started texting me, telling me to sleep well after work and just being generally really creepy. I should probably mention I was 22 at the time, and this guy is well into his 40s. I started avoiding him, and he kept leaving things on my bench. I came in one day, and there were cat posters taped along the back of my bench.
Boy.
I kept taking them down, but they'd be back up the next day. When I started avoiding him, he made a Facebook group chat with me and my dad, complaining about every little thing and just being a major jerk. He made a really rude remark about my friend who was visiting from Germany, so I blocked him on Facebook because I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. B made a new Facebook and remade the group chat just to keep doing it. I went away for a while on a vacation to visit my childhood friend in Washington, and when I got back, he was calling me by my full name, which I absolutely hate. I was tired and jet lagged, so I went off on him, and he whipped around and blew up 3 times worse, telling me I was all these terrible names, and I thought I was so perfect because I was the boss's daughter, and there was no one there as perfect as him. My jet-lagged brain broke down after he walked away. I'm glad I held on till he left, but I stormed out to my car and told all my guy friends to keep him as far away from me as possible because I was so fed up. He started texting my brothers, asking if they were on his side and if they had his back over mine. My roommate, who was a guy, started getting threatening texts from him about wanting to fight over me. Everything was spiraling out of control. My dad made us sit down at the local Denny's one morning to work everything out because he was so sick of B blowing up his phone. When my dad was there, things were fine. B said he wasn't mad at me, but I was just the catalyst the day of the fight and whatever. My dad left to pay the bill, and suddenly B's attitude changed. I was in the wrong, and treated him terribly, and all he ever did was love me, and I treated him so poorly. He kept trying to hold my hands over the table, telling me he loved me over and over. I put on a polite show because I just wanted this to end, and thought if I was nice about it, things would be different. Apparently my answer to everything is be nice and it'll go away. He walked me to my car after the conversation at Denny's and asked if I noticed anything different. I told him no, and he got agitated. Apparently he spent a lot of money on Captain America clothing, everything from a hat to shoes. I told him I didn't notice clothing like ever, and B got increasingly angry, telling me he did it to feel better about himself and impress me. Cap is my favorite superhero. I didn't even know he knew that. He had left the depot for a while, and when he asked to come back, I told my dad's manager I knew we were desperate, and I would be okay if I didn't have to talk to him. I wore headphones every day, my music full blast so I couldn't hear anything over them. He kept coming to my bench and would stand there waiting for me to acknowledge him, and he'd storm off angry when I didn't. He would glare at me if I ever talked to any other carrier, even though I'd been friends with many of them for years. My tipping point was something I found out after the fact. My guy roommate had gone to the grocery store late one Sunday. When he was walking to his car, he noticed some guy watching him. The guy watched him as he loaded the car and smoked a cigarette, and that's when my roommate realized it was B. My roommate got in his car and started driving home, and he noticed B was following him. He tried taking several wrong turns, and every time B followed. My roommate called his friend and said he was coming over, and when he said so, to open the garage to make it look like he lived there. When my roommate met his friend in the house, he told him everything, and they watched him drive by the house 8 times before leaving. No one called the police. I feel like that was the only thing that justified calling the police, because the harassment and stuff couldn't justify police action. I knew that from years of watching crime shows, and I was angry when I found out that no one called. I told my dad I wanted him gone. I couldn't take it anymore. Texts are easy to avoid, but now he was stalking us to try and figure out where I lived, since I wasn't living at home but renting a house with my brother and our friend. I spent months watching over my shoulder whenever I went to the store, worried he'd follow me home. After, he started going to my parents' house a lot because he knew where they lived, like he was waiting for me to be there one day. No one was taking this seriously. The gifts continued, and my mom kept telling me it was free stuff and to just keep it. But the gifts always came after something bad, and it was feeling oddly like an abusive relationship. Oh no, you're angry? Here's a gift to make you forget and like me again. My mom felt that way till her birthday, and a giant bouquet of roses and a teddy bear appeared at her job from B. We didn't even know he knew where she worked. After that, he started cornering me in the parking lot. I told him he'd been told to stay away from me, and I'd appreciate it if he listened. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I took you for granted. I never should have done that. Are we okay now? I was floored. I told him if he thought that's why I was avoiding him, he was more insane than I thought. After that, he was done at the depot and I didn't see him for a while. A couple times I definitely saw him driving around on my route, but I couldn't prove it to a cop if I called it in. The last time I saw him, I was at my second job. I worked in a music store at a local mall. I was messing around with my coworkers when I turned around and saw him watching me from our hip-hop section. My stomach dropped. I almost collapsed and I started panicking. I ran him back and told my coworkers. They agreed if he asked they didn't know who I was and I could stay in the back till he left. I was a manager, but I didn't think I could actually kick him out because he was just watching me. My coworkers said he was there for almost 2 hours just wandering around. Never bought anything. It was like he was trying to wait me out, figuring I had to go back out front eventually. He texts my dad now and then trying to get his job back and fix things. My mom told him if he ever came near us again, she'd call the cops. When my dad wouldn't take him back, he started showing up at my uncle's depot and then started a group chat with him and my dad, saying they needed to sit down and talk. I was with my dad when my uncle called him about it. My dad called everything a misunderstanding. I said I didn't classify stalking as a misunderstanding. That day he came to my other job, I decided I was moving back to my college town 3 hours away. Home no longer felt like home. I didn't feel safe going anywhere. I still worry one day he's just going to show up in my new city. I transferred to the music store there. I had worked with these people my senior year of college, and they have looked out for me even after I moved. They all know the story, and I know they would all fight for me if it came down to it, so I feel safe, but I still panic when we walk to our cars after dark and have to check the parking lot to make sure he isn't there. It's been almost a year, and all I can say is I hope I never see him again.
Well, you already know how I feel with stalkers. If y'all have someone who's like, oh, I'm a secret admirer, nip that shit in the butt. Every one of these were all, like, on point with being stalker stories. And it's crazy that all of these people sadly had to deal with that, even if it is fictional. People deal with stalking every single day. Let me know which one was your favorite. How do you feel about this video? And until next time, you guys, bye.